Have you ever wondered what really makes you tick? Why you chase some goals and not others? Well, today we're pulling back the curtain on two of the most powerful forces in your life, motivation and emotion. We're going to look at the engine that drives you and the compass that guides you. Let's get right into it. Picture this. It's 1996. You're on Mount Everest and a monster blizzard hits. That's what happened to Beck Weathers. He was blinded, fell into a hypothermic coma, and was left for dead. Not once, but twice. And yet, somehow, he found the strength to get up and literally walk back to camp. His story is incredible, and it makes you ask, what is that powerful, invisible force that pushes us to our absolute limits? To even begin to answer that, we have to look at two huge parts of being human. They're deeply connected, but we're going to look at them one by one. First, we'll talk about the engine that pushes us forward, which is motivation. And then we'll get into the compass that guides us along the way, and that's emotion.
Okay, so let's start with that engine. Let's talk about motivation. What is this internal thing that, gets us going and points us in a certain direction?
Well, in psychology, motivation is basically that internal urge that gets you moving, points you toward a goal, and keeps you going. It's the why behind literally everything you do, from something simple like getting up to get a glass of water to something epic like climbing a mountain. It's that internal fire. So how does it work? Well, at its most basic level, it starts with a need. Think of it as a lack of something. You need food, you need water, maybe you need to connect with people. That need then creates what's called a drive, this feeling of tension, right? Like hunger or thirst or loneliness. And that drive is what kicks you into gear, pushing you to go find some food or call up a friend. It's a pretty neat cycle. So, as you can imagine, psychologists have come up with a bunch of ways to explain how this whole motivational engine works. Let's check out a couple of the really big ideas. Okay, think about the last time you had to perform under pressure. Maybe it was a big presentation for work or a crucial moment in a game. Were you totally chill, or were you buzzing with energy? Well, one really interesting model says our performance is directly tied to our level of arousal, and by that, we just mean our general level of alertness and energy. This whole idea is summed up in something called the Yerkes-Dodson law, and it's actually a super powerful but simple idea. To be at your best, you need balance. You can't be too relaxed, but you also can't be completely wired. There's a perfect sweet spot, right there in the middle. You can see it here pretty clearly. If your arousal is too low, let's say you're bored or just exhausted, your performance is going to be pretty bad. But if it's way too high, you're panicking, you're super anxious, performance also tanks. The absolute peak, that sweet spot for performing your best, happens when you're at a moderate level of arousal. You're alert, you're engaged, but you're not totally overwhelmed.
Okay, so arousal levels affect how well we do things. But what about the goals themselves? What are we even trying to do in the first place? Well, a psychologist named Abraham Maslow had a famous idea about this. He said our motivations aren't just a random jumble. They're organized in a pyramid, a hierarchy of needs.
So you start at the bottom and work your way up. Right at the base, you have your most basic biological needs, food, water, that kind of stuff. Maslow's theory is that you can't even think about the next level until those basic needs are met. Once they are, you move up to safety. After that, you're looking for love and belonging, and then esteem, feeling competent and getting respect. And only then, at the very top of the pyramid, is self-actualization. That's the drive to become the best possible version of yourself. It's a powerful idea. You got to build a solid foundation before you can reach for the sky. So if motivation is the engine driving the car, then emotion is the compass. It's what colors the journey and tells us what's important and what's not along the way. Emotions are surprisingly complex. They're not just feelings. They're actually a mix of three things all happening at once. There's the conscious experience, like feeling happy. There's the physiological reaction, like your heart racing. And then there's the behavior that comes out of it, like smiling or maybe running for your life. And this all leads to a classic psychology puzzle, a real chicken or the egg kind of question. Imagine you stumble upon a bear in the woods. Do you feel afraid first and then your heart starts pounding? Or does your heart start pounding first and your brain goes, whoa, heart pounding, this must be fear? What do you think comes first? Well, the first big theory, called the James Lange theory, says your body reacts first. The stimulus, the bear, makes your heart pound and your breathing get fast. Your brain then senses these bodily changes and basically interprets that physical pattern as the emotion of fear. So to put it simply, this theory says we feel afraid because we tremble. But not everyone bought that idea. The next major theory, from Cannon and Bard, had a different take. They said that the feeling of fear and the physical reaction, the pounding heart, happen at the exact same time, but they're independent of each other. The sight of the bear sends two signals at once, one to your brain, creating the feeling, and another to your nervous system, creating the physical response. And then a third theory came along and added a really crucial step: your thoughts. In this cognitive view, you see the bear, your heart starts pounding, but then you do what's called a cognitive appraisal. You interpret the situation. You think, hey, that bear is dangerous. And it's that thought, that appraisal, that leads to the emotion of fear. Which makes sense, right? If you saw that same bear safely behind a fence at a zoo, your appraisal would be totally different, and so would your emotion. Now, speaking of how we interpret emotions, let's talk about a big one. It's a stereotype we've all heard a million times, that women are just more emotional than men. But is there any truth to that? What does the actual science say?
Well, the reality is, it's a lot more complicated. When researchers actually look for consistent, innate differences in how men and women express emotion on their faces, they find very little evidence for it. What really matters, it turns out, is the context. For example, one study looked at stressful situations and found that teen girls from low-income homes actually showed more contempt than boys did. It really suggests that our culture and our social roles play a much bigger part than just our gender.
All right, so we've got motivation as our engine and emotion as our compass. So how do these two incredible forces come together to help us build a well-lived life? You know, a lot of us are motivated by the idea of making more money, thinking it's the key to being happy. But the research on this is really clear. Once our basic needs are met, having more money doesn't really lead to more happiness or life satisfaction. It's just not that simple. The real secret might be in the kind of motivation we focus on. On one hand, you have extrinsic motivation. That's doing something for an external reward, like a paycheck or a trophy. But on the other hand, you have intrinsic motivation. That comes from inside you. It's doing something just for the love of it, because you find it satisfying or meaningful. And study after study shows that the people who really thrive are the ones driven by those powerful internal rewards. So that really leaves us with the final question to think about for ourselves. When you look at all these forces, the needs that drive you, the arousal that focuses you, the emotions that guide you, what is it that truly powers your engine? What sets your compass? What are those internal goals that really give your life meaning and purpose?
Thanks so much for digging into the science of motivation and emotion with us today.